So just to give you a rundown of what we're looking at legislatively this fall, in the July session, Parliament decided to postpone a vote on healthcare reform. Now, it's passed in the first reading. The reform is quite comprehensive. It fixes the broken Soviet system and it brings Ukraine up to international standards. And I won't go into all the details, but in short, it borrows some from the Canadian system, some from the Polish system, and the British system. So it takes some of the better parts of different foreign systems and creates a Ukrainian system which works for people. Now, that was passed in the first reading against quite a bit of opposition from the medical mafia, from pro-Russian legislators, and even some members of the majority coalition. But it was delayed on very technical reasons. One member of Parliament, Ms. Bogomolets, passed out in the ladies' rooms and wasn't able to sign the minutes to try to delay it, and then she was rushed to Feofania. Very typical Soviet stuff. So, these are delay tactics. The vote will come in September, maybe the first week, maybe the third week. It's not quite clear at this point, but it looks that there are at least as many, if not more, votes in favor of the reform this time around. So eventually it's going to pass. There were some amendments made. There were a few things that were changed. For example, the copay was taken out, which I think is a mistake. Ukraine, there's an issue of, the Constitution saying everyone's guaranteed free medical assistance. Okay, but how do you define medical assistance? Does that mean you don't have to pay anything? And when you don't pay anything, then you have a system that reeks of corruption and where, doctors demand bribes for treatment and medicine's free, but everybody has to pay. And that's part of the broken system that has to be fixed. But the new system will provide insurance for everybody. The copay issue will be revisited down the road, and so forth. So we anticipate healthcare reform getting passed in September on the second reading. Another important vote that will come up in September is the pension reform. It passed also on the very last day of the July session with around 200 votes. Some opponents rejoined the coalition to support it, along with Poroshenko Bloc and the Narodny Front. So we anticipate a second vote on pension reform, and that will get passed, which is also very critical for Ukraine because that is an IMF-mandated requirement that Ukraine's got to fix its pension system. So slowly but surely, the IMF is pushing Ukraine in the right direction, both in healthcare reform and pension reform. One other thing that was talked about by the IMF and initially required was a vote on land reform. As you know, Ukraine, again, another legacy of Soviet times is the state can own the land, and you can have no foreign ownership. That's still something that if you look at sociology, is not particularly popular. It's not popular in North America too. I remember in the 80s, everyone was worried about Japanese investment, and then when the 90s recession came, everyone wished we had more Japanese investment. So these things are very cyclical, and it's easy to whip up people, especially populist politicians, who talk about, we got to keep our assets for ourselves. These foreigners are coming in and buying it, which is all kind of a myth. With regard to land reform, Ukraine has been able to successfully negotiate a delay, a postponement of land reform. And the reason is because it's so politically unpopular at the moment. The government has so many other things on its plate with pension reform and the war and the economy and so forth. So land reform has been delayed. It's still one of the IMF requirements. They're not going to require it now. It looks like it realistically would probably come after the 2019 presidential election. But in return, that's why Ukraine offered the privatizations, because the IMF saying, okay, if you're not going to do land reform, what are you going to do this year? And they said, well, we're giving you pension reform, we're giving you healthcare reform, let's go back to privatization. So hopefully, again, Ukraine's not offering their prized assets in these privatizations, but hopefully it'll generate some income, and Ukraine can at least partially meet its target for privatization. So it looks like the privatization minority stakes are a bit of a switcheroo on behalf of the Ukrainian government rather than do land reform. So it looks like land reform may be 2020, maybe 2021.